Single dad saved his drunk boss from a scandal. What she did the next morning left him speechless. Daniel Reyes had exactly one rule that never bent. No matter how bad the day at work had been, he was home by 6:45 p.m. to tuck his 8-year-old daughter Mia into bed and read her one chapter of whatever book she'd picked from the library that week. Tonight it was supposed to be a chapter about a girl who could talk to dragons. Tonight, like most nights, the universe had other plans. At 6:10 p.m. his phone buzzed with a text from his executive assistant coworker, Priya. "Where are you? Miss Hartwell is a mess. Company dinner just ended and she can barely stand. Everyone already left. I have a flight to catch in 40 minutes." Daniel stared at the message for 3 full seconds before he understood what it meant. Elena Hartwell, the woman who had built Hartwell Media from a 2-person startup into a company with 400 employees, the woman whose name was on the building, the woman who had personally hired Daniel 18 months ago when no one else would look past the gap in his resume, was drunk, alone, and about to become the subject of tomorrow's office gossip if somebody didn't get her out of that hotel lobby fast. He didn't think twice. He called his neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who had watched Mia more times than he could count since his divorce, and asked if she could stay an extra hour. Then he grabbed his jacket and drove. The hotel lobby, the Windcrest Hotel, hosted Hartwell Media's quarterly leadership dinners because it was close to the office and had a private dining room on the 2nd floor. When Daniel walked in, he found Elena sitting alone at the hotel bar, her blazer draped over one shoulder, her heels in her hand, laughing at something only she could hear. 2 men in suits at a nearby table were filming her on their phones, not helping her, filming her. Daniel's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what that footage would become by morning. A headline, a meme, ammunition for every board member who had ever quietly resented that a 44-year-old woman ran one of the fastest-growing media companies in the state. He walked straight to the men first. "Delete it," he said, quiet but firm, the kind of voice that didn't invite negotiation. "She's my boss and she's sick. You wouldn't want this happening to your mother, your sister, anybody. Delete it now." One of them scoffed, started to argue, until Daniel held his phone up and said he'd already gotten a photo of both their faces and their table number, and hotel security would be happy to pull the reservation name if this ended up online. It was a bluff. It worked anyway. The phone went dark. They left. Then he turned to Elena. "Miss Hartwell, it's Daniel, from marketing. I'm going to get you upstairs, okay?" She blinked up at him, mascara smudged, and for a second she looked less like the woman who terrified junior associates in quarterly reviews and more like someone's exhausted, overwhelmed daughter. "Danny," she slurred, getting his name only half right. "Everybody left. Nobody stayed." "I stayed," he said. "Come on, let's get you to your room." The long walk down the hallway, getting a semi-conscious CEO up a flight of stairs and down a long hotel corridor without drawing attention, is harder than it sounds. Daniel kept one arm braced under hers, murmuring small reassurances. "Almost there, just a little further, you're okay," while she leaned her full weight into him, eyes closed, breathing slow. Halfway down the hallway she stopped walking altogether and pressed her forehead against the cool marble wall, like she needed a second just to remember which direction was up. Daniel didn't rush her. He stood beside her, patient, his hand still holding hers so she wouldn't slide down the wall entirely, giving her the dignity of a moment nobody else would ever see. "I'm not usually like this," she mumbled, eyes still shut. "Board meeting was bad, really bad." "I know," Daniel said gently, even though he didn't, "not the details. You don't have to explain anything to me tonight." When they finally reached her suite, he didn't go inside. He knocked for the on-call hotel staff member, a woman named Renata, and asked her to please check on Miss Hartwell every half hour, make sure she was on her side, keep a glass of water nearby, and call him immediately. He wrote his number on a hotel notepad if anything seemed wrong. He left a bottle of water and 2 aspirin on the nightstand himself before stepping out. Then he drove home, got there at 9:40 p.m., 3 hours later than his rule allowed, and found Mia asleep on the couch with the dragon book open on her chest, one page marked with her thumb where she must have drifted off waiting for him. He carried her to bed, kissed her forehead, and told himself that whatever happened tomorrow at the office, tonight had been worth it. He never once considered posting about it, telling coworkers, or mentioning it to anyone. As far as Daniel was concerned, the story ended there, in a quiet hallway, with nobody watching. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the office at 8:58 a.m. You 2 minutes early as always, coffee in hand, expecting an ordinary Tuesday. Instead, Priya was waiting by his desk with wide eyes. "She wants to see you," Priya whispered. "Right now?" "Corner office." His first thought was that he'd overstepped, that helping her last night, touching her arm, walking her to her room, maybe in the cold light of a Tuesday morning, all of that read as inappropriate instead of kind. Maybe he was about to be fired for the crime of doing the right thing. He knocked on the glass door of Elena Hartwell's office with his heart somewhere near his shoes. "Come in, Daniel." She was standing by the window, in a sharp navy suit, hair perfectly pinned, not a trace of the woman from the hallway visible anywhere except in her eyes, which, when she turned to face him, held something unmistakably raw. "Sit down," she said, then, after a pause, "Close the door first." He did. He sat. He waited for the axe to fall. Instead, she sat across from him, folded her hands on the desk, and said the sentence that changed everything. "I remember." Daniel blinked. "Miss Hartwell, I remember all of it," she said, cutting him off gently. "The bar, those two idiots with their phones, you telling them to delete it. I remember leaning on that wall in the hallway because the room was spinning and I was terrified I was going to be sick in front of you, and you just stood there. You didn't touch me wrong, you didn't take a single photo. You didn't tell a single person, not even Priya, who I know for a fact would have asked you this morning if she didn't already know." Daniel opened his mouth to say it was nothing, that anyone would have done the same, but Elena shook her head before he could get the words out. "Don't," she said. "Don't minimize it. Most people in that lobby had their phones out. You had your hand out instead. There's a difference, and I am not going to pretend I don't see it just because it's Tuesday and I'm sober, and it would be easier for both of us if I acted like last night never happened." The truth about the night before she told him then what she hadn't planned to tell anyone. The board dinner the night before hadn't been a celebration. It had been an ambush. 3 board members had cornered her before dessert was even served to inform her that they were exploring leadership restructuring options, corporate language for "we think it's time you stepped aside." She'd built the company from her kitchen table 12 years ago. She'd missed her own mother's 80th birthday to close their first major funding round, and now 4 men in expensive suits wanted to quietly ease her out before the next earnings call, dressed up as a strategic transition. She hadn't planned to drink that much. She hadn't planned on any of it. She'd simply reached a breaking point that 13 years of 18-hour days had been building toward, and it happened to break in a hotel bar with an audience. "You know what I thought about, lying in that bed last night, once the room stopped spinning?" she asked. "I thought about how in 12 years of running this company, I have had exactly one person show up for me with nothing to gain. Not a board member currying favor, not an assistant hoping for a promotion. You didn't even work with me directly. You had no reason to stay." Daniel shifted in his seat. "You hired me when I told you straight up, in the interview, that I had an 8-year-old and a custody schedule and couldn't do unpredictable travel. Every other company I interviewed at found a polite way to pass. You didn't. You said, and I remember this exactly, 'Good. I'd rather have someone who shows up for their kid than someone who shows up late for everything else.' I don't forget things like that, Miss Hartwell. Last night wasn't a favor. It was overdue." For a long moment, Elena said nothing. Then she said something Daniel didn't expect. "I'm not stepping aside," she said, more to herself than to him. "Whatever they think is coming at the next board meeting, it isn't. But I need people around me I actually trust. And last night taught me I have fewer of those than I thought." She looked at him directly. "I want you on my leadership team, not marketing coordinator, director of strategic communications, reporting straight to me. I need someone who tells me the truth and doesn't need an audience to do the right thing." What came after Daniel didn't say yes immediately. He asked for a night to think it over, mostly because 18 months of instability after his divorce had taught him never to make big decisions in the heat of gratitude. But he called his mother that evening, and then his ex-wife, because co-parenting decisions still had to be made together even when the marriage hadn't survived, and both of them told him the same thing. "You didn't do it for a promotion, but you'd be a fool to turn one down that came from someone who actually noticed who you are." He said yes the next morning. The board restructuring conversation happened 3 weeks later, and it did not go the way 3 particular board members had hoped. Elena walked into that meeting with a full-year strategic roadmap, a stronger fourth quarter than projected, and, quietly, deliberately, Daniel seated beside her as the newest member of her leadership team, a visible signal that she wasn't isolated, that she had people, that pushing her out would not be the quiet, uncontested transition they'd imagined. The restructuring proposal was tabled indefinitely. 6 months later, at the company's holiday party, Mia came along for the first hour in a green dress she'd picked out herself, and Elena crouched down to her height to ask her, seriously, whether dragons were more likely to breathe fire or ice, because she'd always personally been Team Ice. Mia considered this with the gravity of an 8-year-old settling an important scientific debate and declared that it depended entirely on the dragon's mood. Daniel watched the two of them from across the room and thought about how strange it was that the worst night of his boss's professional life had somehow become the reason his daughter now had someone else in her corner too, not a replacement for anything, not a rewritten family, just one more person who'd proven in a quiet hallway nobody was supposed to remember that she showed up for the people who showed up for her. Elena Hartwell never spoke publicly about that night. There was no press release, no LinkedIn post about resilience, no viral moment. The two men who'd filmed her at the bar never posted their footage, whether out of fear or shame. Daniel never found out and didn't care to. But every year, on the anniversary of that dinner, an envelope shows up on Daniel's desk. No note, no explanation needed. Just 2 tickets to whatever traveling exhibit is currently at the Children's Museum downtown. The kind of gift only someone who remembers exactly what he cares about most would think to give. Some debts, Elena had told him once, aren't the kind you repay with a raise or a title. They're the kind you repay by remembering, and she never once let herself forget. If this story moved you, you're not alone. Sometimes the smallest acts of decency, the ones nobody's filming, nobody's clapping for, end up changing the entire direction of someone's life. Like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments, have you ever done the right thing when you thought absolutely no one was watching? End. Approx. 3,050 words.